Fighting games. Something I'm not particularly good at. When I was a kid, I'd go to the arcades all the time and try and play Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat, but I never won a single match I played. I was actually too small to even effectively reach the joystick to put in commands, but more importantly, I was never really able to do any of the special moves or pull off fatalities or anything like that. The sad truth is, when I was a kid, my fingers lacked the dexterity to do complicated tasks like that. To give you a better idea of what I meant, even though I knew exactly how to do it, I couldn't properly get my hands to tie my shoes until I was in grade 6. I just lacked the proper finger articulation to do complex tasks like that. And because of that, I was genuinely well and truly awful at fighting games. At best, I only had punch, kick, and if I was lucky, block in my repertoire. Which is why, in 1996, when I played Virtua Fighter 2 on my Saturn, that was the last fighting game I would play, with the exception of Gotcha Force, which is a very different type of fighting game, up until about 2010 with BlazBlue Continuum Shift, which had the ability to hold down buttons to do special abilities. And you know, being able to pull off special abilities in that game allowed me to kind of reignite my interest in the genre. Even though I wasn't good, I really wanted to learn more, and that's when I asked someone I knew to try and teach me how to play fighting games better. We were at it for about a month, and I'm still honestly not much better, but I remember one of the first things he told me was, fighting games are like chess. And I remember thinking that was the most pretentious thing I had ever heard. How could a fast-paced fighting game be anything like a slow, methodical strategy game? Didn't make sense to me. Eventually, I played the original Samurai Shodown, and it kinda clicked into place. This is Samurai Shodown 4, evidently 3 iterations past that game, and while it has sped up a little bit, I think it still retains that same sort of impact that it had on me, in the sense that I really started to understand what he meant by that. Now, if you're a real fan, you know this isn't actually the first time I've shown this game off. I actually showed off footage of this game on the Sega Saturn, back when I was talking about that abysmal Galaxy fight, to show one of the many better fighting games you could be playing other than Galaxy Fight. And yeah, this game was awesome on the Saturn, and here on the Neo Geo on the Xbox One, it's a lot of fun as well. The story follows your selected character of choice, of a total of 17 total choices you could have made, trying to invade the castle of Shiro Amakusa, the villain from the original game. You have 8 minutes to do so, and if you should succeed, you get to fight like 3 extra fights. And if you don't, then you get a bad ending. It's a fighting game. There's not really a ton of story here. However, it does feel like there's at least a little bit of connection between some of the characters, as they do show up in various cutscenes with one another. But overall, it is a fighting game. There isn't really much there for you. Of course, the key component to this game is the gameplay, and that is where this game really hits it out of the park. Now, going back to what I was talking about in the beginning, this, or rather the original, was sort of the game that made me understand the overall sort of strategy and mentality of fighting games. How it's about being able to read your opponent's sprite and see where they're attacking, where their hitbox and hurtbox are going to be, where they're able to defend in any sort of attack, and try and work your way around it. And the original Samurai Shodown, and by extension this, unlike your Street Fighter, Turbo, Hyper, Alpha, A-Spec, Gold Edition, whatevers, this game plays comparatively very slowly. And because of that, there's a lot of tension in between each strike. There's a lot of trying to figure out exactly what your opponent is going to do. And in that regard, it actually feels very close to actual proper sword fighting. There's a lot of analysis and understanding as to the build up to each important strike. Yes, the follow through and action are very important, but it's being able to figure out where your opponent is going to be least able to defend themselves, and how you can keep yourself sort of within a defensive stance, all while taking out your opponent. Every character, of course, has different attacks, special attacks, what have you, but of course there's also the standard kicks, heavy slashes, weak slashes, as well as throws, and every character does this differently, and I really think that's where that mentality comes from, at least as far as I was able to understand. Now, it being Samurai Shodown, it is one of the, if not the very first weapon-based fighting games. Every character has a different weapon, and this affords them a different fighting style, like we kind of talked about. You have characters like Haomaru, which happen to use a long sword, as opposed to, say, Nakaruru, which happens to use a slightly smaller sword. Or you have Charlotte, which has a rapier, which gives her quite a bit of range and makes her more effective at poking opponents at a distance. Every character's weapon affords them a completely different style that really does affect how they fight, and I think that's really well and truly awesome. You can also, if you're good enough, effectively disarm your opponent, which can also completely turn the tide of battle. Without their weapon, they're pretty much limited to punching and kicking, and if you've got a sword, well, you've got effectively about 3 times the reach they do. In addition to this, there's of course the rage meter. As you attack and are attacked, you build up more and more rage, which, once it fills up, kind of ultimately allows you to unleash a super devastating attack. And if you combine that with the counter system, basically if you attack and then attack your opponent, you'll actually do a percentage more damage. So you can kind of strategize how you want to avoid getting attacked, or what attacks you can kind of allow yourself to get hit by to get a bit of an attack bonus. I think that's really interesting and makes this a very, very strategic game in that respect. In addition, there's also a super crazy power ability, which I think I only managed to actually activate once, but the enemy seems to do this every fight, and it basically burns through your entire rage meter as well as some of your health meter to get a super attack off, assuming it hits anyway. And if it doesn't, well, then they just completely lost all their rage meter and the chance to do rage attacks, which could effectively turn a fight completely on its head, and I really appreciate that. In addition to the fact that there are 17 different playable characters, there's actually a few different variations of every character. Every character has a light and a dark form, sort of like an honorable or dishonorable fighting style, and they do vary a little bit. The big one that jumped out to me was if you happen to pick Nakaruru's light side, she would be fighting with her hawk, and if you picked her evil side, she'd be fighting with a wolf, and that actually completely changed the way she fought. From what I could tell, I don't really play as her much. In addition to the light and dark side, there's also different combat styles, a beginning style, as well as an intermediate and a more difficult style. I tried playing as all 3, but I didn't see too much of a difference. It seemed like each of them allowed for slightly more complex combinations of inputs to achieve different like super attacks and like activating that super style and stuff. I think it really is just sort of a, if you're new to fighting games, easier might be easier for you, harder might require a little bit more finesse and mastery of inputs, which, you know, I might be a little bit better than when I was a kid, but I still can't do special abilities regularly, so I kind of just stayed away from that. The overall combat to this game is really, really great. Like I kind of said, it does focus a lot on the lead up to each attack, as well as the actual attack itself, in addition to defending. However, this is an SNK fighting game, and that means, of course, one thing. This game freaking cheats. Okay, I'm not good at these games, I get that, I can accept that. That's why the first time I played through this, I happened to play it on level 2, as opposed to difficulty level 4. And I got through the game with no problem, up to the final areas, when the enemy could block literally everything I threw at it. I decided to start over on the default difficulty level of 4, to see how tough the standard fights were, and honestly I had no problems with them, again up to the final fight, when I just could not defeat the enemies. Yeah, SNK Neo Geo games, they tend to be tough, but their fighting games, they tend to just get straight up unfair, and it really does feel like the enemies just read your inputs, which ultimately leads to a sense of just frustration, especially if you're genuinely not good at these and trying to get better like I am. I get that I might not necessarily have the standard fighting game experience compared to everyone else because of how unskilled I am at these, but still, you know, I was having fun up to that point, but then it gets just frustrating and not very fun. But if you like a challenge, those last few stages will definitely give you that. Overall, I think the gameplay to this is excellent. There's lots of different fighters that all play differently and are genuinely challenging opponents to try and understand and analyze and figure out how to properly fight. I kind of like the idea of setting a timer to all this because, well, a lot of this is analysis and finding the right moment to attack and figuring out the right way to attack. Well, this means that you have to move fast as well. And when you try and apply precision to a time limit, well, that means you're going to get a little bit more sloppy at what you do. And that adds to the challenge. The different routes based on how well you do also make things pretty interesting. Combine that with so many different nuanced special abilities, fatalities, which I genuinely don't think I've ever actually managed to pull off, counter systems, the honorable and dishonorable fighting styles, all the different characters. There is so much to this game that makes it really wildly deep, and makes it basically a completely different beast than the original Samurai Shodown that I tried to learn with. And I think that means that this game ends up feeling quite fresh. I have been told that this game is basically just an upgrade of Samurai Shodown 3. I'm not sure how true that is because I haven't played 3, but I quite enjoyed Samurai Shodown 4, and of the like 3 or 4 Samurai Shodown games I've played, I'm inclined to say this one's probably my favorite in terms of gameplay. Now, the overall presentation to Samurai Shodown 4 is absolutely gorgeous. First of all, the sprite work is of course amazing. It is a Neo Geo game. The animation is nice, it's fluid, it's fast when it's in motion, and when it's not in motion, you really get to appreciate the sort of details involved. The backgrounds are absolutely gorgeous, and the effects that they apply to the backgrounds, and even during the fights, really make it feel equally calming and serene, as well as intense and hectic. I think this is probably one of the more beautiful fighting games I've ever seen, and the audio design for this game is tremendous. A lot of the soundtrack likes to take sort of a slow, serene, eastern flair to it, which really does emphasize the lead up to every attack. The slow bits in between strikes, where you have to understand your opponent and figure out how to attack them. And then they mix that with basically hard rock, and that punctuates the attacks ever so eloquently. And when you really get into a flurry of attacks, well, that just really makes you feel awesome. Seriously, the soundtrack to this game feels like it understands both aspects to this game perfectly. Now, if you want a copy of Samurai Shodown 4, or Samurai Spirits 4 on the Neo Geo, cheapest one I'm seeing right now is about $100, which for a Neo Geo cart is pretty cheap, and this game is excellent. This is probably one of my favorite fighting games that I've played for the Neo Geo, certainly. And that's coming from someone who doesn't have the biggest interest in fighting games, but I still enjoy them from time to time, even though I'm still completely objectively awful at them. You can also get this on the PS1 for about $20, and if I recall, the PS1 version also includes Cham Cham from Samurai Shodown 2 as a playable character. Although it's also a PS1 iteration of a Neo Geo fighting game, those tend to not go down so well. As I've shown previously, way back in the day, you can also get this on the Saturn, and because that's a Saturn version of a Neo Geo fighting game, that's actually almost arcade perfect. If you're gonna buy a home console version of this that isn't just straight up this, I would recommend that. Plus, it means you have to get yourself a Saturn. And everyone needs a Saturn in their lives. It's awesome. There's also, of course, the Samurai Shodown Anthology that was available on the Wii and I want to say PS2. I've never seen a copy of that. I would like to get one though. But Samurai Shodown 4, I think, is an excellent fighting game, even for someone who doesn't enjoy fighting games all that much, mainly because I'm still 100% awful at them. I love this game. I think it's a great fighting game, and I love this series in general. Samurai Shodown holds a very special place in my heart as being the thing that made me kind of better understand how to actually play fighting games, or at least the mentality behind them. And because of that, you know, I really want to play them all. And I think out of all of the ones that I have played, Samurai Shodown 4 is probably the cream of the crop. Lots of characters, lots of different styles, lots and lots and lots of special abilities, super attacks, ways to power yourself up, ways to counter, ways to block, all sorts of stuff, and every character feels like a labyrinth of complexity to explore. This game feels like an absolute enigma of concepts and content and complexity when it comes to actual fighting. And you know, I respect it a lot for that, because it does feel like it comes together pretty well to actually make something that is really quite special. I think Samurai Shodown 4 is a cut above the competition.